From the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson.
Insert Democrat socialist here.
Runs the Democratic House floor for 30 plus years running. He's promising this and he's stealing that. Where can you get that kind of money? He's using your house like his own piggy bank. You ought to know by now. You can pay off your house here in Illinois, but you can never keep up with the taxes. Oh, how it's always been the plan to have a taxpayer pay, no doubt. Not a matter of if anymore, but when you're moving out. I said when you're moving
theme
out.
music means it's time for our weekly confab with Ted Dabrowski, President of Wirepoints. Wirepoints.org, all things Illinois policy related, and talking about Illinois policy. You do comparison and contrast to what other cities, big cities, and states around the country are doing. And, you know, there's been so much talk over the years about Illinois' insolvency and Chicago's insolvency, which it, you know, functionally is if you applied private sector standards, but we don't. And the idea that to get out of the unfunded pension, public sector pension liability, for example, maybe the state or the city or both could declare bankruptcy, bailouts from the Fed are not coming. So it's just interesting to think about the highest profile bankruptcy, municipal bankruptcy in recent memory, and that was Detroit's. It's been a decade.
Really? That went by fast?
Yeah, well, so now you've had some time to see
if it worked.
Well, what the results are, right?
I remember kids would go to school and just to learn that their school shut down and they converge with the school 5 blocks away. That's how bad it was at one point.
In the intervening years, I remember just a few years ago, maybe pre-COVID, there was all this talk about Detroit resurgence and the Quicken Loans guy who owns the Cavs, so he's buying up properties, residential properties for a song, and there's going to be redevelopment of Detroit and so on and so forth.
And then the Hmong community was doing organic farming in certain Detroit blocks where they raised the houses, and then it turned into a artisan community.
Oh,
downtown
yeah.
there,
It's going to be like, Portland.
Art district. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
what they were trying to, and they wanted
Right.
big tech companies to come there. And
Well, it is like Portland in terms of the crime, but not otherwise. James Holman has a really good piece in Reason magazine about this. In 2013, residents found out that the group the city owed the most money to was not banks or bondholders or city contractors. It was the city's pensioners. Listen up, Chicago city employees, and state employees for that matter, although the problems are more pronounced in the city of Chicago and a lot of municipalities too, police and fire. Listen up. Obviously, they were the largest creditors because the city didn't have the money to pay out current beneficiaries. So Detroit retirees got their pensions cut in bankruptcy. That's what happened, in case people forgot.
oh,
The city also no longer pays for retiree health insurance, which the state does. Illinois, I'm talking about. 20 years in on the job, and you get health insurance for the rest of your life, or at least till you're Medicare eligible. Retirees in Detroit instead rely on coverage from the Obamacare exchanges and any subsidies they may be eligible for there, plus Medicare when eligible. Pensioners would have gotten a better deal had the people managing their investments not been corrupt and exploited their positions to benefit themselves. Gee, golly. Could you cut and paste that statement and cut it and paste it all over Illinois and Chicago? Multiple Detroit pension officers and advisors, by the way, were sent to prison for taking bribes. That's a fact. So where does it stand today? Mr. Holman, writing in The Reason, reminds us, an important step in emerging from bankruptcy was for the bankruptcy court to certify the city's bankruptcy plan was feasible, that the city would not fall back into solvency shortly after going through bankruptcy court. City officials hired a high-priced consultant who wrote a 226-page report on the subject, and the conclusion was the plan feasible? Tough to say. Jesus. 226 pages to say no one really knows.
No one knows.
Tough call. So where's Detroit today? Still losing people. The city's population dropped from 700,000 to 620,000 in the last decade. Detroit is the poorest city in America. The Motor City's poverty rate,
What?
32%. The next closest city in the country is Memphis at 24. The national average is 12.5. So it's almost 3x the national average. Median household income is $34,000, which is half the national average. Listen to this stat.
Okay.
Only 39.6% of Detroit residents were working in 2022. Less than 4 in 10 are working.
And the rest were just sitting at home?
The people living in the city are subject to an inordinate amount of crime as well. More than a quarter of Detroit residents say they have been victims of vehicle theft, home or auto break-in, property vandalism, or physical violence in the past year, according to a survey by University of Michigan. 1 in 4 Detroit residents have been a victim of vehicle theft, home or auto break-in, property vandalism, or physical violence just in the last year. That's life after people. That's where Detroit's going. As the author concludes, Detroit has many problems. Bankruptcy solved one, the city's inability to pay its pensioners and other creditors. It didn't make the city more prosperous, more functional, or less corrupt. Detroit continues to earn its reputation as a poor, dysfunctional city. So for those who are saying, well, if you can get out from underneath the pension obligations, as many have said, including on the conservative side of the spectrum, well, then we can reorganize Chicago. We can revitalize Chicago and the state as well if we can get out from under these massive unfunded public sector pension and public sector health benefits. Detroit did, and it's the poorest city in America. And
one of the most dangerous.
yeah, particularly on a per capita basis. 1 in 4 residents just in the last year has been a victim of a serious crime. Wow. It's big numbers. So San Francisco, look into Chicago's future. Detroit, to look into Chicago's future, because the thing that hasn't changed in San Francisco or Detroit or Chicago is the mentality of the electorate and the people they elect. So you're going to get more of what you've been getting. Ted Dabrowski, President, Wirepoints, wirepoints.org. Ted, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Amy.
How about that Detroit story?
Oh, it's an amazing story. I remember exactly that same week that they filed for bankruptcy. I'd never been in Detroit. And so me and 2 other colleagues got in the car and we went to Detroit for 2 or 3 days. And, I wanted to see it with my own eyes because I couldn't believe, the whole story. And when I got there, so we met three important people in the community. One was a bond guy. And so he knew all about, the negotiations and the risks. One was a newspaper guy, Detroit Free Press. And the other was a activist who'd been county commissioner and all that stuff forever. They said there are 3 big lessons to take away from that. And this is the problem with the Detroit bankruptcy. They waited till the city was done before they filed for bankruptcy. So there was nothing left. You could file for bankruptcy, but all you needed to do, which is what we did, we drove around the city, and there was nothing left. There was nothing left. You had that hub of the downtown, and then there was just empty, raised homes all over the place. And, they said, first and foremost, respect the taxpayer, because once you lose your taxpayer and they flee, and that's what they did, right? Detroit lost like 1 million whites. So they lost their tax base. Then they lost their black middle class. Then the tax base was totally gone. They said also watch out for the financial markets because they will come after you. Once they smell it, they'll come after you. And the third thing they said is stop promising things you can't afford. It's immoral. It will bankrupt you. And that's precisely what happened.
That's when
we are a decade later.
When I lived there, people were setting their homes on fire to try to get the, insurance money, and that was rampant.
But enough about Mitt Romney.
Oh.
Remember the famous story? Mitt Romney's house went from it was from, in the late 80s, it was like a $1.5 million house. Then in the turn of the century, it was a $600,000 house. By the time Detroit declared bankruptcy, it was worth $0. So,
Yeah,
that's the cautionary tale. So now, Ted, fold in with all your knowledge of Chicago and Illinois, fold in and tell us what the comparisons and contrasts are.
Well, I tell you, and to get that, I think I mentioned one time. There's a great book. When I went there, I learned about the book. It's called Detroit: An American Autopsy by a guy named Charlie LeDuff.
Oh yeah, I have
ex-journalist.
that book. Yep.
It was so good because you read it and you say, "Uh-oh, is this what's happening in Chicago?" And most of it had to do with the incompetence of course, the people are electing incompetent leaders, and the incompetent
Like
leaders
Coleman
kept
Young.
doing the same stuff. Exactly.
Well, Dennis Archer was there, and the list goes on and on. They
Yeah,
all had
and
the same
well,
policies.
they had the same policies. Is all the same stuff. All they let crime happen. Of course, they never got control of crime. People started burning houses all the time. Then you had the big burning parties. And Amy, by the way, people stopped doing it for insurance. What they explained is that they started just doing it for parties. You just get a whole bunch of people together. You burn the house across the street, and you hang out and just watch. So it's a lot about this crime, the collapsing education, the lack of merit. It's just a decrepit management, and these people aren't. And again, same thing like Mayor Johnson. They're not professionals. They are social justice warriors. They're not business people. They're not managers, and they don't care about these like merit and competition and attracting investment. They just double down on the bad things. People keep buying it, and you spiral, and that's the spiral. We're in that spiral right now, and it's hard to see us stopping it, especially as you watch Mayor Johnson continue to implement the little things that he does that perpetuate these problems.
Well, that's why, like, this idea that, police and fire pension funds in Chicago are both less than 25% funded. That's spiral. And so if and when they ultimately fail, and I think they will, then you say, oh, well, the feds will come in, or the state will come in, or you'll find the money somewhere. Maybe you will, but what's that going to do? You think that stabilizes the city? No, it doesn't. It's just going to force more people out. More people are going to flee when it becomes real. I mean, people that can do like grade school arithmetic are already fleeing. The people that are comfortable with their self-delusions or just trying to get more for them before they take off, they're next out the door. And if something actually happens to prove there are consequences to generations of terrible public policy, then you'll have people heading for the turnstiles like they are in Detroit.
Well, and it has to happen. I'm sorry to say it. It's sad to say, but Detroit didn't have the amount of pension debt that Illinois does. Illinois, if you look at a Chicago household, not only do they have these massive city debts, right, the police and fire and the city workers, but then there's the Cook County pension debts they have to pay, and then there's the state pension debts they're on the hook for, and the state retiree health care insurance they have to pay for. So I would argue that you're going to see at some point when the city tries to start raising the money in a more serious way, because right now it's not raising enough. Then people will leave faster, and it's already happening anyway, right? When you look at the likes of the Griffins and the latest departure from the rail company, we're going to lose our wealthiest, and then it gets really hard. Then you've got the middle class to go after, but then the tax hikes have to be even bigger to get the money out of the middle class.
Well, what about that 3% flat tax that Mayor Johnson wants to implement on people who make $100,000 or more?
Yeah,
I mean, how are they? What are they just going to send bills to people's houses? I mean, how are they going to implement
you have to get General Assembly approval. You have to get the state legislature to approve it.
I heard you. It's just the aldermen have to approve
Wrong.
it. Wrong. Okay.
Yeah, I need state approval, but again, they can keep doing that stuff, but it's always at the margin. And remember, we always talk about this out-migration stuff. There's two things that happen in cities and states: people move out and people move in. And what's going to happen in Chicago is more people move out and fewer people move in, because you don't want to be the sucker that comes in and has to pay all the bills. And people, and the more the national press gets out there about the crime, about the doom loop, about these higher property taxes, they're not going to come here. Or if they do, they're immigrants who are going to get state help and city help instead of the ones who contribute to the tax base.
Some good news I saw you reporting from the perspective of the prevailing viewpoint in the city. The good news, we have the largest black-white unemployment spread in the country. Black unemployment in Illinois is north of 10%. That's great news because, number one, you need people dependent on the government in order to have your constituency if you're BLM Brandon or Jelly Belly. So that's good news. So more people are on the welfare rolls. And number two, they've got big plans. The way that you address the unemployment gap and unemployment generally is to put more people on public payrolls like Brandon Johnson wants to do. So there you go. That's what you get. You get people at the bottom that are dependents on the state, and you get the economic club types that are insulated from terrible public policy that live here in the summer and then go somewhere else and pretend they're, Chicago's tribal elders, and nothing in between. And that's the perfect recipe for continued political hegemony.
Dan, I mean, the data is always so damning. Nobody cares about data, as we know here. But when we started running these numbers the other day, it was just fascinating. I had no idea that we had the highest gap. So if you look at the white unemployment rate in the first quarter for Illinois, 3.3%, right? So down there at the bottom, like most countries. But then you look at the blacks, over 10%, and the 7.2% gap between blacks and whites in Illinois is the highest in the country, and that's despite all these equity and progressive agenda that Pritzker and Lightfoot and all these Johnson, they don't work, and that's it's obvious to us, but the data should make it obvious they don't work. They actually make things worse.
We need to invest in communities. We need a Marshall Plan for the West and South Sides. We need year-round employment financed by city government. We need universal basic income financed by Tony Preckwinkle. Just all the more reason that we got to attack this crisis, Ted. We got to attack this equity crisis, and that means more government at every level. Yeah,
and yesterday I was with one of these guys from the Civic Committee, Civic Fed, type BGA type guys. Yesterday, and it's fascinating. It's painful because here you are. These are the titans of finance and economics and private equity and all that stuff. And they know numbers. They know that they know what bailouts look like and all that, and yet they don't fight this kind of stuff. This data is not good enough for them. They want to make sure they're invited to the parties.
Right.
Well, you know what? I wish those kind of people won't talk to me because I will slap them around rhetorically and more if necessary. But somebody needs to remind them, hey, buddy, your business, if you can't move it, and whatever you have left in the city, and you personally, you think there's a Scarlet Pimpernel coming to save you when the Neo-Jacobins come for you, buddy? Just remember, I told you, you're on your own. They're scared. Well, they're cowards. They've been used to being respected, revered, catered to because they have a little bit of cash or because they're part of a big operation, and now they're just afraid and they don't know what to do. They're house cats.
What's funny is they complained that Griffin picked up and left. So it's a funny thing. They complain about that, but you got to be thinking they're thinking the same thing. They don't know they've got to maintain their graces in the public, but they've got to be scared.
Ted Dabrowski, wirepoints.org, all things Illinois policy related. Ted, thanks as always.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You've made the switch,
Dan,
and it feels so good. You've switched to Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Tell me why Relief Factor